What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on the Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me tonight, you recognize him from the Fantasy Sports Network, from RotoExperts. It's Frank Stampfl. What's up, Frank?
Not much, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Always good to chat. We try and do this a couple times a season. Obviously, if you're not already doing so, give Frank a follow on Twitter, Roto_Frank. Tons of good stuff. Obviously, check out the Fantasy BFFs, and we'll give you all the promotion at the end. But I wanted to have you on. Obviously, there was a lot of kind of craziness. We're a month into the season. A lot of the guys that are coming back from suspension are due back this week. We got some Le'Veon Bell news. We got some other kind of messy situations I wanted to pick your brain about and kind of see where you're at. But I guess for first things first, over the first part of the season, over the first we're a month in the books, what has been the most impressive, the most surprising, the thing that maybe is really your big takeaway from the first month?
I think it's the offensive explosion we're seeing right now too. Maybe it's linked to the this whole tackling issue right now that's going on, where you can't hit a quarterback and it's extending drives. But there's just so many points being scored in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest takeaway, right? Like quarterbacks, like obviously Patrick Mahomes getting off to the start that he has, but just quarterbacks having that ability to throw for 4+ touchdowns any given week, and really any given quarterback too, right? There was 4 quarterbacks who did it last week who threw for 4+ touchdowns. Derek Carr, Andrew Luck,
Mitchell Trubisky,
right? Like 6 touchdowns, and then Jared Goff on Thursday night. So I think the offensive explosion to start the season, whether it's to do with the penalties that are going on or just the lack of defense, I feel like there's more points being scored now than ever before. And I know we're going to get into this later on with Mark Ingram coming back, obviously, but like Alvin Kamara, right? Like he's defying every single analytic regression candidate that we thought he was going to be. Like there's no way he can replicate what he did last year, and he's pretty much just picked up exactly where he left off.
It's insane the rate of touchdowns he's scoring, and even Will Fuller, who's been banged up, but when he's been in there, he's been scoring a lot of touchdowns. And obviously, some people on Twitter are taking victory laps, saying regression's not coming, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. The first month of the season, maybe it's something that will come along, or maybe Alvin Kamara is just a crazy talented dude with that explosive ability and can literally hit the home runs on any play, but also has that kind of talent level to maintain some of the higher levels that some guys of that kind of skill set haven't been in the past. But yeah, I have noticed, like, every week in my redraft, in my dynasty leagues, I have to score more points if I want to have a real shot at winning. Obviously, like the cash lines in DFS, like this week was insane. He had to score over, on DK, I think it was over like 200 points just to cash it. A lot of like the 50-50s and double ups and stuff, which is something you rarely see. It seems like it's almost 50, 60 points more. And obviously Trubisky and Mahomes and Andy Dalton, these guys are throwing 5 touchdowns, and then obviously their playmakers are doing a ton of stuff. So, it is very interesting to see if that's going to be something that continues over the course of the season, and we have to just kind of reevaluate what we need on a weekly basis, or if it will kind of balance out to reasonable expectations. But let's jump in and talk about the Le'Veon Bell situation. Obviously, this is an interesting thing that I think initially everyone's like, oh yeah, he'll be back, he'll be fine, he'll play. Oh, he'll only miss 2 games, he'll be fine, he'll play. It looks like he's coming back for the Week 7 bye, get back in, work everything out, and be ready to go Week 8. Now, Mike Tomlin came out today and said he hasn't talked to Le'Veon Bell. So what that whole situation is, we don't know. But I guess, what do you make of this situation? And if we're working under the premise that Bell is back in Week 7 during their bye, how do you think the Steelers look in kind of Week 8 and beyond?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, right? And it kind of reminds me of, imagine you have like a super hot, scorned ex-girlfriend, right? And she tells a mutual friend of yours that she's gonna consider getting back with you in the next 2 to 3 weeks, right? Like, you want to be optimistic about it, but at the same time, like, can you really trust that that's going to happen?
Yeah.
Like, this is how I feel about Le'Veon Bell right now. All I wish one of these seasons, Kyle, is that we can have all of our top tier running backs without any suspensions, without any debacles, no off-field concerns. But it seems like that's never going to happen. So that's really just become a part of fantasy football. But how I see this playing out, look, I think that he wants to play. I think he will be back at some point, whether it's week 8 because they have the week 7 bye. Week 8 will be they'll come off the bye against the Cleveland Browns. Whether it's then or whether it's week 10, I think he will be back at some point. But it's hard to trust him overall. Like, what is his conditioning going to be like? Remember last year in week 1, he only totaled 47 total yards against the Cleveland Browns in that week 1 matchup. That was without any preseason. That was without any training camp. It's kind of the same thing now. I know that he's saying that he's, in playing shape, but obviously, like, what else is he going to say?
Yeah, right. I've actually been sitting on the couch and playing Xbox this whole time. I'm not even ready to go.
Yeah, I've actually been having, like, release parties for my rap album and jet ski.
Well, I mean, he actually has been doing that. So, yeah, no, I love the little comparison to that Scorndex Lover. And it's funny, too, because it's like last year, it's like, oh, they had the bumpy patch, and then everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, they're hitting the bumpy patch, and this time they're taking an extended break. And now it's just like it's keeping on building. And, it is a very interesting situation. Obviously, all expectations are that he's elsewhere next year. James Conner, but has been getting basically all the touches in this backfield. Do you think it's obviously, like you mentioned, it was a little bit of a slow start last year, probably going to be reasonable to expect that again this year. But I think when all systems are go, say he comes back and it's week 8, by week 10, do you think it's, 50-50 share? Do you think it's like 80-20 and they're just going to run Bell until the wheels fall off, knowing they have Connor for the rest of his kind of career? Or how do you see that kind of shaking out?
So the way I see it is, I think the first week that he's back, he's probably splitting some time with James Conner. Mm-hmm. But I think, after that first or second week, I think it's all systems go for Le'Veon Bell, right? Like, what else do the Steelers have to lose? Like, he's not going to come back to them anyway, so they might as well try and run him into the ground or use him as much as possible. Last year, he was number 1 in snap share among running backs, number 1 in opportunity share, that's carries plus targets. He was number 1 in carries. He was number 1 in red zone touches. He's essentially a rental for them, and a really, really good one at that. Yeah. So I think, that first game back, maybe we see like a 50-50 split, a 60-40 split, something like that. But once we get to, week 8 and on, week 9, I think it's normal Le'Veon Bell. I think we're seeing, at least 18 carries, at least 6 targets a game, like just standard Le'Veon Bell. And, they can use him right now. Pretty much every week since week 1, James Conner has been trending in the wrong direction. So, week 4 finishes RB31 in PPR leagues. In week 3 finishes RB22. Week 2 he was saved because he scored a touchdown, but in that game he only had 17 rushing yards. Yeah. The Steelers right now bottom 5 in rushing in the league, 72.2 yards per game, and they're tied, a 5-way tie for 5th worst at 3.6 yards per carry. Le'Veon Bell is not the best efficiency-wise in terms of like on a per-carry basis, but there's no doubt that he's better than James Conner. And I think we're all kind of seeing that now since that big week 1 breakout game. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised while we're on this, people were very excited about James Conner if you have him in like dynasty or keeper leagues. I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers now at this point realize that maybe James Conner isn't the running back of the future. Maybe they go out and they draft a guy next year, because there's just so much turnover with running back from year to year. So like, everybody who was excited about having Conner as, that RB1 next year in keeper or dynasty leagues, I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, and I could see even if he is like their quote-unquote feature back, they realize that if they give him 90% of the touches, he wears down a little bit faster than kind of what Le'Veon Bell would do. So maybe he's a guy that, next year they bring in somebody else, and he's kind of the 60-40 split, the good side, and kind of that's their plan for the next couple of years. Now, Juju obviously has been getting a ton of volume and has been really good, and I got to give you a lot of credit because I was kind of a little cold on him coming into the season, but you were definitely banging the table for him there. Antonio Brown. The volume hasn't quite been what you expect, but it's still been pretty dang good. With Bell's potential return, do you think the targets come down a little bit, or do you think that it just kind of gets cut from Vance McDonald and James Washington and kind of the ancillary pieces?
Yeah, I do think that there's a direct correlation between Juju and Le'Veon Bell. I forget who it was, whether it was Graham Barfield or Scott Barrett. I mean, both guys are putting out great stats on Twitter all the time. If you're not following them, I honestly recommend to do so. But it was one of them who tweeted out that there's a direct correlation in the past like 5 or 6 games that Le'Veon Bell hasn't played. Juju Smith-Schuster's targets have been through the roof. And if you look at his ADOT this year too, he's getting a lot of those passes close to the line of scrimmage, which is normally where Le'Veon Bell is doing a lot of his damage, out in the flats. They line him up as a slot receiver at times. So I think, there is going to be a direct correlation to Juju Smith-Schuster there. So I'm not saying you absolutely have to sell Juju, but if you can get low-end wide receiver 1 value back for him right now while other people aren't really thinking about it, like if you can turn Juju into Adam Thielen or Mike Evans or somebody
Julio
like that,
Jones.
who I think – or Julio Jones, like a guy that we can trust the target share more so for over the course of the season, that's something I would look into doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great call. And I think, especially after that Fabiano tweet about everybody wants Calvin Ridley over Julio Jones, I think that's definitely a deal you can make. Or, you kind of work it as, okay, I'll give you Juju and, a low-end running back, maybe a Royce Freeman or Kerryon Johnson. And then you get, a big upgrade at running back and then a receiver you can use on a weekly basis, something like that. I think that's an interesting call. Let's head down. Obviously, we already hit on Alvin Kamara a little bit, but Mark Ingram is back. He's actually back from suspension. I guess, how do you see this offense kind of adjusting with Mark Ingram back in the mix? Obviously, Kamara has been insanely valuable thus far and a ton of touchdowns. Do you think it comes back to reality just a little bit with Ingram in the fold?
Yeah, I think it definitely takes at least somewhat of a step back for Alvin Kamara, right? Because if you look at what he's doing right now, and I think we all kind of expected this through the first 4 weeks of the season, like they would run Kamara into the ground, which is, they're not just running him into the ground. They're like throwing him into the ground based on the targets he's getting too. Like he's tied for 4th in the league in targets right now with 47. Think about that.
He was after week 3, he was leading the league in red zone targets, which for a running back is insane.
Yeah, so I think just naturally they have to scale him back a little bit, right? Because the Saints, honestly, they have Super Bowl aspirations. As young as Alvin Kamara is, he's spry. Like you got to keep the guy somewhat fresh. So, is he going to get 12 targets per game still? He's on pace for 188 right now. Like that was never going to happen. Yeah. I still see him, he's getting around like 14 carries per game right now. I see him in that 10 to 12 carry range and let's say 7-8 target range, right? So he's still going to be about 16 to 18 touches per game. And maybe it's not the first week back because I could see Ingram, maybe getting like 10 to 14 touches this week. But I think, after the week 6 bye, which, we probably, as a fantasy industry, I know some people were talking about this before the season. We should have hit on this more about the fact that you wait 4 weeks to get Ingram back. Yeah. You play him for 1 week, and then he's on a bye again. So you don't have him for 5 of the first 6 weeks. It's just really frustrating, honestly, because I own him in a few places, and I'm just kind of realizing the brunt of that now. But I think after that week 6 bye, we see Mark Ingram in that, 14 to 16 touch range, getting 12, 13, 14 carries per game and getting 2-3 receptions, something like that. He was never a guy who caught the ball a ton like Alvin Kamara, but he has a few 50-plus reception seasons under his belt, so he's no slouch either. Yeah. The biggest takeaway, I think, you mentioned it earlier, was red zone touches right now. Kamara is number 1 in red zone touches this year. Last year, Ingram had 33 red zone carries. That was top 12 among running backs. So I would expect Ingram to definitely eat into Kamara's production in that part of the field.
Yeah, and obviously we've seen his explosive ability. So Kamara, even if he's getting a few less touches close to the end zone, still has the ability to take one to the house at any point. So I think Kamara is still a bona fide week 1 or RB1 the rest of the way. But yeah, I'm with you. Touches will come down, but maybe that's something that keeps him a little fresher and kind of helps him be stable for your team the rest of the year. And I'm also wondering, does this cut into Michael Thomas's workload a little bit? Obviously, had a little bit of a down week this week against the Giants, but he's still averaging over 11 targets a game. I expect him to obviously be the wide receiver one there and get plenty of volume, but maybe he's kind of like 7-8 targets a game with Ingram back.
I think when you mentioned Juju earlier, you asked me, does it just kind of take away from guys like Vance McDonald and stuff like that for the Steelers? I would say that's the effect that Ingram being back is going to have on those, secondary pieces for the New Orleans Saints. I'm not really worried about Michael Thomas. I think he's still a bona fide, top 5, maybe even top 3 wide receiver rest of season. Maybe he doesn't get like the 15-plus target games that he was getting before, but I still think he's going to be in that 10 to 12 target range, like week in and week out. Like, yeah, I trust him. I think if anything, you'll just see those guys like Ben Watson, Ted Ginn, Traquan Smith, Cam Meredith probably do next to nothing. So I think this offense is really just going to run through Kamara, Ingram, and Michael Thomas for the most part.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. Let's keep it rolling. So Joe Mixon, obviously, we saw him after the Bengals won and, celebrating, bouncing around. I guess it's been 2 weeks. They're saying 2 to 4 weeks for his potential return. If you were, a betting man, if you're in Vegas and you could put money on whether he plays or doesn't play this weekend, I guess what is your expectations? And if you think he does play, what does that look like?
If I was a betting man, I would say he does play this week. And if he does, I still don't think he's 100%, but I feel like teams sometimes, and it's not like the Bengals need to do this because they're obviously in a great position right now and they're playing great ball, but I feel like sometimes teams rush players back, especially with injuries like this, like a knee injury. We have great guests every Thursday on the Fantasy Best Friends Forever. That's a shameless plug. I'm sorry.
No, keep it coming. Keep it coming. It's a great show.
Inside injuries, right? We have these sports medicine doctors come on every single week, and they told us with what happened with Joe Mixon, this injury is more of a 4 to 6 week timetable, not the 2 to 4 week timetable that they were leading us to believe. And anytime with the knee, obviously, like your ability as a running back to be able to stop on a dime, to juke, to lateral, to just do anything pretty much as a running back, you need to be fully healthy. So if I were a betting man, I think he probably plays. I don't think that he'll be valuable for fantasy. Like, I wouldn't want to play him. I've had a lot of people asking me, like, should I trade for Joe Mixon? Personally, I don't like trading for injured players, especially running backs dealing with knee injuries. So I think he plays. I don't know how effective he's going to be. If I were the Bengals, I would personally keep him out until week 6 just because Gio Bernard has done a absolutely fine job. Like, he's finished as the top 10 running back each of the past 2 weeks for fantasy purposes. He's done every single thing that they can ask of him and more. And I think that's kind of going to muddy the situation a little bit. I don't know that we get the Joe Mixon from early on in the season when he was getting, 80% of the snaps and, the majority of the touches. Based on the job Gio Bernard has done this year, I think, he's earned himself some more touches moving forward. So it's probably going to be more frustrating than it was early on in the season for Joe Mixon owners.
Yeah, I think if I'm with you right there. Is if I'm the Bengals, I'm trying to hold him out as long, whether that's another week, whether that's another 2 weeks. Let him. You don't want him coming back and then making a cut to beat a linebacker, and all of a sudden he's done for the year, and then you're like, well, now we're screwed. I mean, this offense is moving. Andy Dalton's look as good as he could. I mean, AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, obviously losing Eifert isn't great, but they have pieces where over the next week or 2 or even 3, if that's what it takes for Mixon to be back where he needs to be and be fully healthy, because you want him coming back and you want him getting that volume, and maybe Bernard gets some of those Tyler Eifert targets and kind of still works in, because I believe like you do that he's been really good and deserves touches and targets and all that good stuff. But I kind of am with you in terms of we probably see him. It's probably not a normal volume, but they probably get him back in and start working him a little bit this week. Returning for the New England Patriots, Julian Edelman this week. Obviously, Tom Brady's guy, PPR monster, should be really valuable when he comes back. But I guess if you're looking at kind of this Patriots team as a whole, James White's been really good, getting a lot of volume out of the backfield. Sony Michel had his big breakout on Sunday. How do you think Edelman's kind of, underneath stuff impacts kind of these guys and Gronk and kind of the other weapons they have there?
Yeah, so I think Julian Edelman coming back hurts those other pieces, the Cordarrelle Pattersons, the Philip
Yeah.
Dorsetts, because surprisingly, Philip Dorsett has been pretty consistent in terms of
Hmm.
his target share this season, week in and week out. So, I would imagine a player like Philip Dorsett probably takes the biggest hit, and even a guy like Chris Hogan. Like, I don't know how much worse the guy can get, but I really don't know where his targets are going to come from now. Like, he
Yeah.
already wasn't getting targets. I really don't see how it's going to happen now, unless it's one of those things. And I see people make this argument a lot, like, oh, he'll be better now. He'll be more efficient on less targets because, teams have to focus on trying to stop Julian Edelman. Like, Julian Edelman is going to be, I think, consistently the top target getter in this offense. Him and Gronkowski, if Gronkowski is 100% healthy, because now he's dealing with an injury. Surprise, surprise. But I think it more so affects the guys like Philip Dorsett, Cordarrelle Patterson, those guys that have just been kind of interchangeable. And, for us saying all this, I haven't even mentioned Josh Gordon's name yet. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of pieces to go around with the New England Patriots. But I really do believe that the one constant, or rather, the few constants that I trust in this offense are still going to be Edelman, James White, and Gronk, because those are the guys that Tom Brady trusts most, and I don't see why he would go away from them, right? Like, Julian Edelman, in his career with the Patriots, 532 targets in 55 games between 2013 and 2016. That's 9.67 targets a game. I think he steps right in, and he's getting 7 to 9 targets, as you mentioned, for PPR. I think he's a top 24 wide receiver right away. For standard, I mean, obviously he was always much more valuable in PPR. Standard, he's probably like a low end wide receiver 3. In the games where he scores a touchdown, he'll boost up into that top 24 range. But I'm trusting him right out of the gate, and I just think he kind of hurts those other pieces more so than the main guys in the offense.
Yeah, yeah, and I always like when a player's coming back from suspension. I always feel a little bit better about them stepping right in the field and being productive. Obviously, they're in terms of health, they're fine. So yeah, I think he comes back. I think he's 7 to 10, 12 targets a game and gets his normal workload. I am curious to see how this offense looks with Josh Gordon and Chris Hogan, kind of doing their thing with Edelman. Obviously, if Gronk misses time or is banged up, that's better for Hogan. That's better for Josh Gordon. But Edelman's going to eat. I am curious. Obviously, Sony Michel had his big carry day. If that was more of a product of rolling the Dolphins, or if that's something that fantasy owners should kind of expect on a more of a weekly basis. Let's head back down to Atlanta and talk about the Falcons. Devonta Freeman, there's talks that he could be back this week. Tevin Coleman's been rock star since kind of being given the full volume there, and obviously he's a guy that could find himself starting somewhere else next season. But with Freeman coming back, do you think that he kind of steps into a timeshare and kind of gets some of that volume that we had kind of penciled him in for before the season started?
Yeah, so I think this is probably going to look more so like a 50-50 split than we imagined coming into the season, right? Like, normally we see a lot of – it's probably more so like 65% Devonta Freeman, 35% Tevin Coleman. I would say that's probably a fair breakdown of, their touches and their targets the past couple of years. But I think with what Tevin Coleman has done the past couple of weeks and showing that he's able to handle this workload, like – we say workload. I mean, it's still just been 16, 15, and 14 carries the past couple of weeks, and that's normally the Devonta Freeman role. But Ito Smith has been getting worked in as well. So I think it's maybe we're more of like 12 to 14 touches each for both Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman. Like, Tevin Coleman, I agree with you, he's probably going to be somewhere else next year. He is in a contract year. While I'm sure they would love to have him back, he's only 25 years old. They have a lot of money invested in Devonta Freeman. So I think they're probably just going to cannibalize each other for fantasy value, and it's going to be really frustrating. Like, you drafted Devonta Freeman in the second round as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, and I would say at this point he's probably closer to like the low-end RB2 range, with Tevin Coleman being that flex that he normally is. But I just think that they're going to both take away from each other. I will say, if you have Tevin Coleman, I wouldn't just go out and try and trade him right away because Devonta Freeman might be back this week, because Devonta Freeman is coming off a knee injury. He's dealt with concussions in the past. Like, on any given week, he can instantly go down again, and then you find yourself with Tevin Coleman as, this borderline RB1. So just because Freeman is coming back, I don't know that I'm going to go out and trade him away just because I'm worried about Devonta Freeman. Because honestly, as a Freeman owner in multiple leagues, I'm more worried about him re-injuring himself than anything.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you there. And obviously, if someone wants to give you, close to RB1-ish numbers, value in terms of value for Coleman, then especially I'm a Freeman owner. I'm worried about my running back situation on a weekly basis. Maybe I'm willing to give up a little bit more, but yeah, no, I'm holding him and knowing that, at least I have somebody I can play and get a decent floor every week. And then if Freeman happens to miss time, I have a guy with tons of upside at a running back position. Speaking of a running back position, let's head up to Seattle and talk about this mess. Obviously, Chris Carson looked like he finally stole the job, and then all of a sudden he's out and doesn't play this week at Arizona. Mike Davis steps in and somehow gets 21 carries for 101 yards, finds the end zone twice. Rashad Penny, the rookie that they drafted in the first round, they don't seem ready to commit to him, and I don't know if it's Pete Carroll didn't really like him, but the front office did, and they decided to go with him anyways, or what the deal is. Penny was valuable. He only got 9 carries, but 49 yards. I guess what's your read on the situation? Is Mike Davis somebody that you're looking to add and potentially start this week if we know Chris Carson is out? Or if Chris Carson returns, is he going right back in your lineup, or is this just an offense to avoid?
Honestly, while you were bringing up the Seattle Seahawks running backs, the first thought that came in my head was, do we really have to talk about this? But this is just a completely frustrating situation, and I tweeted out about it a couple of weeks ago when, after, 2 weeks ago when Chris Carson had that 30-carry game.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to anything that Pete Carroll had been doing to that point. Like, it was basically an even split in terms of snaps for Rashad Penny and Chris Carson. And then Chris Carson went out and had that monster carry game. The week before, Pete Carroll said that he rested Chris Carson in the second half of that Bears game because he was winded from special teams. Like, what's going on in Seattle? This is completely crazy. And then, I don't know that there's been anybody more critical than the Seahawks than myself, because a team that has that many deficiencies, both on the offensive line and on the defensive side of the football, like, this isn't the Legion of Boom team that from years past. They go out and draft Rashad Penny in the first round of the draft when they have that many needs, and they're not even using him. So I agree with you. There has to be some kind of disconnect somewhere here. I don't know if it's going to lead to, Pete Carroll getting fired with this team or something changing with upper management, but it just doesn't add up. Why would a team use a first-round pick on Rashad Penny when they have so many holes and they're not even playing that guy? Like, it reminds me of a couple of years ago. The Colts drafted Philip Dorsett in the first round when they needed first offensive lineman.
Yeah, protect your valuable quarterback. Give no defense. It makes no sense. And then obviously the whole Earl Thomas flipping off the bench thing. I mean, it's an insane situation up in Seattle. It's amazing how quickly the team can go from a Super Bowl contender on a year in, year out basis to a complete dumpster fire. All their studs are in other places, and it's just Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, and that's it. Like, it's incredible. But yeah, I think, honestly, I think it's a situation where every week we're really not going to know, and depending on who's healthy and who Pete Carroll decides is worthy of touches in a week, and how that offensive line is performing. Obviously, this week they face the Rams, so it could be a long day for them. So maybe it's not even someone that you're willing to use for a couple weeks. So adding Mike Davis probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, anyways. But yeah, it's just a really interesting situation that I feel like every week we could have somebody carry the ball 20 to 25 times for a productive day. We just don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I don't know if you do like weekly rankings on a weekly basis, obviously, but like last week was pretty much the best opportunity I could imagine for a Seahawks running back, and I still only had Chris Carson ranked as my RB20. He was going up against the Cardinals defense that had allowed something like the top 5 most fantasy points to running backs this season, and I still only felt safe ranking him as a low-end RB2. Like, that's the best possibility for a Seahawks running back. And I think, week in and week out, who are we going to know? Is it Mike Davis? Is Chris Carson? Is it Rashad Penny? I don't think we are going to know. That's what's kind of annoying about fantasy football. Like, the Seahawks probably like doing that because, that means the opposing defense doesn't know who's going to be the starting running back. But for fantasy, it's just a completely unknown situation. And I don't really know if we want to know either because the offensive line still isn't great. So Mike Davis, maybe if you own Chris Carson, you go out and throw a small fab bit on him just to make sure that you have the Seahawks running backs. But honestly, I'm not throwing more than like 7 or 8% of my fab on Mike Davis this week.
Yeah, and then the week you're like, oh, Chris Carson's out, I'll play Mike Davis, and that'll be the week Rashad Penny has like 20 carries for 105 yards. But like you said, this offense is a mess, and you could even play him, and it seems like a good matchup, and the offensive line just gets annihilated, and Russell Wilson's running for his life, and you just end up really frustrated. Last guy I want to hit on before we get out of here is Nick Chubb. Obviously, an uber talented guy out of Georgia, definitely had injury issues, but only played 3 snaps on Sunday and still had 105 yards and 2 touchdowns on two carries. I guess obviously this isn't someone that you want to add and start right away. But is he somebody that intrigues you, where if you have room on your bench, you're willing to kind of hold on to him and see if something emerges and maybe he becomes the guy and kind of takes over for Carlos Hyde? Or do you think? I mean, because I was looking at touch percentage and stuff, and Carlos Hyde's getting 75% of the running back touches in Cleveland, and as of now, it seems like it's kind of his job to lose. But is Chubb somebody that intrigues you and you're kind of holding on to in spaces you have the ability to do so?
Yeah, he does intrigue me. And, I wouldn't have expected that at this point in the season because I wasn't really in on Nick Chubb for this year in fantasy, just because this situation reminded me of the Tennessee Titans a couple of years ago when they drafted Derrick Henry, but they also signed DeMarco Murray. Yeah. And I thought that the Browns would use Carlos Hyde a lot, which they're obviously doing. He has 83 carries through the quarter mark of the season, which leads all running backs. But you have to realize Carlos Hyde at some point is going to break down if you're using him this much. Like, he's averaging more than 20 carries per week. So they have to start to, ease his workload a little bit. He's not really doing much in the pass game either. So, maybe we see Carlos Hyde come down to about 15, 16 carries a game. I know Hugh Jackson came out today and said that Nick Chubb needs to get more carries. So I think that he's going to get more involved. More of the reason why I would want to stash him is not just what he can do as a complement to Carlos Hyde, is if something were to happen to Carlos Hyde, you see the production that he's giving us already for fantasy purposes. He's a top 10 running back. If something were to happen to him, Nick Chubb instantly steps in and has, high-end RB2 value, maybe even low-end RB1. So that would be my hope if I'm stashing Nick Chubb. Not that, obviously, we don't hope for players to get injured, but there is serious upside if something were to happen to Carlos Hyde.
Yeah, I feel like we could be talking in Week 12, Week 13 about how important Nick Chubb has been to playoff teams, and he's going to be someone that you want to start every single week as the playoffs approach. Because this, obviously, they're the Browns, but this version of the Browns is so much better than any Browns team we've seen in a long time. They're not winning every game, but they're super competitive. They put up 40 points this week on the road. So if there's pieces in this offense that if Nick Chubb is getting the volume with Baker Mayfield doing his thing, there's a lot of fantasy upside there. So yeah, I'm with you. I think if you can stash him, obviously the monster game, it was impressive, but I think people could go, oh, well, he only got 2 touches. It's easy to write off. It was kind of a fluky game. So you could kind of sneak him in under some of the other waiver wire bids, or, maybe he's a guy that, ended up kind of cruising through waiver wire, and now you can pick him up without, any fab or whatever. But just hold on to him. And, obviously it's going to be hard with bye weeks and whatnot, but I think there's a ton of upside that, if you have the flexibility on your roster, especially if you're a good team that can be patient, I think it's definitely worth a stash at this point.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And on the flip side, right, I don't know if you're a Carlos Hyde owner, but in places where I own Carlos Hyde, I would try to shop him now, just to see what you can get. Maybe, the average fantasy player, and I don't really like saying it like that because it's not like, we're much better than anyone else playing. Right. But like in your average league, if people don't realize that Nick Chubb is going to start getting more work, or they haven't realized any of that, and they just see, oh, Carlos Hyde is a top 10 running back right now, then you might be able to get back serious value for him. So if you can just shop him for like a David Johnson or a Kareem Hunt, just to like see, or like even pair a piece with Carlos Hyde to try and turn him into one of those like bona fide workhorse running backs who we can trust for the season long, then that's something I would certainly look into doing as well.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth throwing some offers out there, and don't take something just to trade him, but if you can get serious value on him, or if you're a team that happens to have some good depth at running back, and you need receiver help, maybe he's someone that you can get a little upgrade at receiver, and I think it's definitely worth throwing some offers out there, saying, hey, I'm okay at running back, I'm looking for receiver, looking to help you with, and seeing if you can't make something work. Frank, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking some time. Tell everybody where they can read your work, check out your show, all that good stuff.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at Roto_Frank. You can check out the Fantasy Best Friends Forever every weekday at noon Eastern Time on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network, Fantasy Sports Network YouTube page. We're a simulcast, so we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're all over the place. We're on Periscope. But if you miss it live, you can obviously download it anywhere where you download your podcast. You can download it on demand. And then I have my weekly rankings. They come out usually Thursday morning on RotoExperts.com. They're free, and I usually write up about 5 players that I am higher on than the consensus. So you can catch that at RotoExperts.com.
Yeah, and obviously, throw Frank a follow, and all of his work will be tweeted out through there as well. Frank, this was always fun, and we'll have to catch up as the season rolls along.
Yes, sir. Thank you, my man.
All right, take care.